What'd you say, Ron? You're too broken up.
Start recording now.
Okay. All right. Welcome to session 2 of the reading group for the Fountainhead. We have a small group today, 4 people, but that's enough for a good discussion. I'm George Smith, and I'll be the moderator. No lectures or anything for me. My job is to kind of get other people to talk. But I do want to start off with some kickoff questions that were posted yesterday on the Facebook page for the reading group. I'll just read what I posted, and this is just to sort of get us into something specific rather than waiting for someone to think of something. On page 43 of the Fountainhead, we find this intriguing interaction between Peter Keating and his boss, architect Guy Franchon. Quote, as Keating sat now watching Franchon read this article, Franchon, and this was a very favorable review by Ellsworth Toohey, Franchon raised his head to glance at him. Franchon saw 2 eyes looking at him with immense approval and 2 bright little points of contempt in the corners of Keating's mouth, like musical notes of laughter visible the second before they were to be heard. Franchon felt a great wave of comfort. The comfort came from the contempt. The approval, together with that wise half smile, granted him a grandeur he did not have to earn. A blind admiration would have been precarious. A deserved admiration would have been a responsibility. An undeserved admiration was precious. Then I just asked some general questions, which we don't have to consider separately, just sort of sets the mood. Why did Franchon take comfort in the glimmer of contempt displayed by Keating? Why would this contempt convey a sense of Keating? Tell us about the relationship between Keating and Franchon. And let me add as an addendum that passage stuck out with me because frankly, I didn't quite understand it. And that's why I wanted to get some feedback. I mean, it's not like illogical to me. I just didn't understand why someone like Franchon would get pleasure from seeing contempt, even a little bit of contempt, in this sort of sycophant of his. And why that would why he would like to make that feel that gave him undeserved admiration. My experience with guys like Franchon, although he did accomplish things, is that they don't want to see they want toadies. They don't want to see any contempt or any sort of critical perspective from their followers. So what do you guys think? Am I off base here when I talk about it surprised me that contempt would please him?
Well, I thought there was a lot to unpack here because on the one hand, whenever Rand depicts a hero, that has got a little bit of contempt in the smile. So that's something that she herself admires in a male character. But I also think that one thing with Keating is that he is kind of, and I just heard her say this recently in a video, an old video, but that he's sort of half good and half bad. There are a lot of good qualities about Keating.
Yeah, he's very smart in his own way.
Yeah. So, but going back to that, I was wondering if that had anything to do with a level of recognition, that maybe Keating recognized Franchon for what he was and wasn't going to expect anything more of him.
Any other opinion? I think that's more than I could make out of it. So, you have an opinion about this, Patrick?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of some experiences from your personal experience when you deal with others, and sometimes when they show a strong opinion about something, that like when they show contempt for a set of ideas, sometimes you are comfortable because they have established their position. Like, oh, this person doesn't believe in X, Y, Z, or so sometimes there's some amusement and familiarity when someone, it's like poker, right? They kind of show their hand and you're like, okay, I know this person stands. I don't need to guess too much.
So in that sense, their relationship isn't based on any illusions. They both kind of know what's going on, but they like. Nicole, did you want to pipe in or?
I'm trying to figure out how to say it. Can you guys hear me okay?
I can. Yeah.
Okay. Um, I don't know. I think that really Keating has no reason to admire him now that he's worked with him. Franken doesn't do anything. He's just the guy at the top who signs his name to the work that other people in his office do. And Keating doesn't know how to do that work. He knows how to change things once they've already been on paper, but he doesn't. He sits down to actually draw a house, and he gets lost. He doesn't exactly know how to do it, and
Right.
so I think I don't know. Maybe that has I don't know. Trying to figure out how to say it.
Yeah. You're right about the by a blank piece of paper. There's a very clear scene in there where that's indicated. And then it goes to Rourke and wants the fact. I love that part where Rourke is, getting rid of the colonnades and all the Greek and Roman stuff, and I forget what Keating says to him, but finally Rourke says, "And those ducks on the door have got to go."
Calm down the ducks. I thought that was great.
There's interesting, as we talked about last week, there are interesting little flashes of humor in Rand.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Well, also I admired Rourke because he wasn't afraid of this stuff. He doesn't go in there and say, "I can't even look at this because I'll somehow be threatened." Rourke is so complete and so has complete integrity, so he can go in and work on these designs without worrying about his own and being compromised. So he hasn't got anything to fear. So he could say something like that.
Well, there's indications in this chapter, the chapter we're reading, the three we're reading, to confirm. I can't remember the specifics now, but to confirm more or less what I said last week, that I mean, he does it, and in some levels he does it well, I guess, as drafting and things like that. But it's not a field that really absorbs him like, of course, anything comparable to Rourke. He likes it because it's success and because the admiration and all that stuff.
That's right. He didn't want to do it. He wanted to be an artist.
Right, and his mother. That mother's a piece of work for him when she comes to visit him and gets her an apartment. Oh, this will do for now. And
could it be that he has a hard time drawing, houses and things because he's so worried about what other people will think of what he does? And that's why he takes it to Rourke first. That's why Rourke is the first one to look at it because he knows Rourke isn't going to judge him. He's the one person in his life who just takes things.
yeah, I think that's part of it. Well, I think also it's just that he's not much of a creative person. Ultimately, he had some creativity, obviously, but I think it's you're right, Marilyn, when you say there's that kind of two-faced, that Janus-faced aspect to Keating, because unlike other people, at least he appreciates Rourke's genius, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's scared by it, and he kind of hates him for it, but he knows it's there, which is a lot more than other people seem to understand. So I had forgotten, it's been so many years since I've read this, what a complicated character Keating is. He's not this sort of nebbish sort of, yes man who does anything other people want him to do. Very calculating. I thought that way he got those two guys out of the office of Francon.
Oh my God, that was terrifying.
Yeah, I know. Well, one of them, he actually got him his own office, which if you're going to get somebody out, that's not a bad way to do it. The other one, he took over, I forget his name, the Tim guy, I think is his name, Tim something. Okay. But he offered to do work for him because the other guy was obsessed with his fiance and his wife. And then I guess he started turning it in late and says, well, he's busy, he's getting married, and made sure he got fired. That was really vicious.
He was. Smart man. But again, it's so he doesn't.
What? I didn't hear you. Okay.
Oh, I was saying.
I don't know if she can hear me or not.
It shows how smart he is, and he's very conniving.
sort of way.
Yeah.
And he takes pride in it because he outsmarted those guys.
Can anyone find that they can relate to both characters in terms of Rourke has this very idealistic, hard-nosed opinion about things, and it's a very sort of righteous position. And I think when you're very young and you feel like you know a lot and you know how things should be done, so you're very passionate about stuff, but then sometimes over time you realize that in order to cooperate with people, like in the workplace, that you have to be a little more diplomatic, about how you go about work, and not, getting your colleagues angry. And I mean, sometimes you could be the person that gets fired. If you're a brilliant jerk, then goodbye. So how do you, like, reading the book, do you find in some ways relate to both characters, or I mean, they're pulled apart into very separate identities. But
yeah.
And he knows.
That's a good point.
He knows.
Let me see the names here I have.
Person. He told his girlfriend Katie, I don't want to meet Ellsworth through you because I use people, to seek my own end.
People.
And that's exactly what he does.
Yeah, that was interesting. But he later changes his mind when he sees her and she's picking up papers off the floor. And he said he would like to meet her uncle. And said, I thought you didn't want to meet him through me. And he says, oh, did I say that? I don't remember. So clearly he's changed his mind, right? Figuring, I don't know.
Right. Well, so anyway, so I think that the ability that Keating has to connect with his coworkers and to be helpful isn't a bad thing, but the fact that he uses it to manipulate and to harm other people is a problem, and I just couldn't see doing that even for advancement. It's I know it is done. I'm not naive, but I still think it's wrong. I think it's fundamentally wrong.
Yeah, he advanced in 3 years to be first. The chief designer, I think, was his title when these chapters are over. But it only took him like 3 years, so he was a fast mover.
Yeah. I mean, because Rourke also helps. Rourke, whenever Keating comes in and says, help me, he goes in and he helps. And he never, even at the designs the housing project or whatever it is, and he never says that it's his. Of course, he blows it up. But again, he's not using it to climb the ladder. He's doing it because he wants the chance to. He wants to do the work.
Oh, I want to tell you guys. I've never seen anyone else has seen it. I saw it many years ago as a rerun. Do any of you know the old Barney Miller about those cops in New York? I forget the people that started it. It was very popular. I guess probably in the early 70s around then. Anyway, they run this sort of small precinct, and they have this. It's like the Andy Griffith Show. The cell's right there where they can talk to the prisoners, And a guy's arrested, and he's an architect, and he tried to blow up a building that he had designed because he'd read the Fountainhead. I'm serious. They actually mentioned Ayn Rand, and he had a business suit on, looked very, very professional. But I don't remember what happens to him. But he explains to them, well, I read the Fountainhead, and that guy blew up.
It's funny. You should look for that and see if we can. Yeah. Watch it.
I don't know where you can find reruns of Barney Miller, but I used to actually keep a mental inventory of every time I'd hear Ayn Rand's name mentioned in movies and on television. There's a movie called Boys in a Band, which is one of the first kind of movie with all gay guys, dealt with the gay culture. And a gay friend took me to see it, and there's a mention in there. The four guys live together in New York, I think, and one comes in and says, hey, have you read such and such book yet? And he says, no, I'm still trying to get through Atlas Shrugged.
I wanted to comment briefly on maybe a comparison between characters in two very different books. So
Okay.
in Act, there's Henry Reardon, for Reardon Steele,
Right.
and is somewhat of a possesses virtues of both of these characters, Peter Keating as well as Rourke, in that he's a brilliant engineer, but he's also a leader who's built an organization and who understands and directs his organization to be a sort of captain of industry. Whereas I think Rourke is more of a fierce or individualistic type character, and architects have a sort of directing function in that they need to organize other groups and collaborate. But to me, something that's distinct is there seems to be she's taking two elements of a character like that and splitting them and showing what some of the negative use their social influence in a negative way, and those sort of people can be dangerous in the workplace as well, right? Like they steal credit from you, or they advance themselves and they're not worthy, or haven't earned the position, and then they direct others who actually possess the creative talent. And we've seen all these things, right, in real life. So, what are your comments on, like, perhaps these characters versus other characters?
Well, I haven't read The Fountainhead for even longer than I'd read, Hat Drugged, and I'm trying to jog my memory about the details of Hank Reardon. I don't know. You called him, he's sort of he splits into two different, he has the character traits of two different characters. Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, I think he has virtues that both of these characters have, and that being brilliant, and very fiercely possessing a lot of integrity about his ideas, but then also has these social virtues as well. He's able to build and direct an organization and read other people.
Well, he's one of the guys that John Galt wanted to convince just to give it up and join them in Galt's Gulch, right?
Yes.
So I think my recollection, and I really even shouldn't be talking about this without rereading it, but is that he was one of these that had to find out for himself the futility of going against these statists and these altruists and things, and it was better to go on strike. But anyone know about that?
I would also say too, maybe just in terms of Rand's own skill level, that she at that point is able to write a very complex character with a lot. I think book by book, she makes these characters more exciting and really broader, because they can handle a lot more. And I think that's partly has to do with. I mean, I think of this Henry Cameron, right? Isn't it? Who's Rourke goes to work for at the very beginning here. Did you talk about him last week? I apologize if you did.
If we did, I'm sure he came up, but not in any detail that I recall.
Right. And again, he has the same virtues, I think, as Rourke does, but he's somebody who's just really destroyed by the.
That's a character that's always bothered me on some level. Maybe it's because it's depressing the way his life ends, but that kind of
all of everything in the stove.
Yeah. The people do get that way when they get older and they feel they've been unappreciated. They get kind of very embittered. But his early interaction with Rourke, where he does that kind of phony, ignores him and go away, boy, you bother me. And then he says, the most brilliant draft I've ever seen, in effect. That sort of character, it's a good movie character, but in real life, a guy like that would annoy me. Like, okay, so you're bitterly disappointed, but don't put on that facade, that kind of I don't give a shit personality when you're talking to a young up and coming genius. So,
right. But, although he's a good foil.
Oh yeah, he's a good character, sure.
He shows what we see what Rourke could be, and then what he won't be. But also he gets Cameron has to have taken all of the hits that
Well, he was successful at one time. He was sort of the belle of the ball, and then what was the explanation for why he fell into disfavor? Did whatever it's called, modernism?
Yeah.
Did that fall out of favor or something?
Right, reminds me of like Herbert Spencer, who all of a sudden
he was like world famous, then pretty soon he was just
and he was dropped.
crazy old man who nobody should read.
Exactly.
You remember? I think it's one of the first 3 chapters. She talks about classicism coming into favor with the World's Fair.
The Chicago.
Was it in Chicago? Yeah.
Yeah.
And all of the gaudy architecture, and they wanted to copy it. And a little interesting bit of history. There's probably truth in it.
Yeah.
Okay. Before I offer suggestions, any parts of the 3 chapters that struck you guys you'd like to just raise as a topic to talk about? When am I reading these chapters? I try to read them closely, maybe reread them once or twice, and certain paragraphs will just kind of, hit me. Sort of, oh, that's an interesting way of putting it. Well, one thing I think we should talk about, unless you guys have other suggestions, is at the opening of chapter 6, the book by Ellsworth Toohey, Sermons in Stone, I think is the name of it.
Yep.
By the way, Barbara Brandon in The Passion of Ayn Rand said that the Toohey character was modeled after this English socialist professor, Harold Lasky. Now, I've read some Lasky years ago, some of his political theory. But she said that he was this guy sort of knew everything and got up and offered these pearls of wisdom. And I don't remember much about Lasky, except I remember reading one book by him that really wasn't too bad. But apparently he became the sort of the character for Toohey. But anyway, what do you think about the book by Toohey, the Sermons in Stone? It reminded me of an early version of what's her name, the senator from Massachusetts. Hold on, I've got her name. I knew I was going to forget her name. So, what Trump called her Pocahontas. You guys don't keep up with modern politics. Okay. Well,
Just that Trump said that.
I know.
Well, I'm sorry.
Because she got a scholarship, to Harvard or some Ivy League school based on her claim that she was Indian descent. And apparently,
Elizabeth Warren.
Right, Elizabeth Warren. You guys remember, it was a number of years ago, 4 or 5 years at least, when she started criticizing somebody or other, saying, oh, these manufacturers think that they built that building themselves, but they didn't. They had to have the public roads so the trucks could, get to the location. It's basically everything is a cooperative effort. There's no one thing that any one individual can take credit for, because except for a common thing among sociologists is to claim that about speech, language. Well, he couldn't have written that book without the language, and he didn't invent the language. That's a kind of a largesse from generations and generations of people. Okay. And this thing by Toohey goes on about no one person creates a great work of architecture. It's just expressing the will of the people. And, if you read that part, you know what I mean. But it really reminded me of Warren when I read that. It's almost like she got the sort of just copied the passages.
It was a user manual for.
But she didn't know that was supposed to be. She didn't understand that was supposed to be the villain. She thought, "Oh, that's wonderful." Anyway, there's an old, famous, kind of infamous cartoon that was done in Reason magazine back in the 70s when Nixon was president. It's really good. I think you can probably find it online somewhere. And it had like 4 frames, and it has Nixon walking into the Oval Office. And he says, oh, somebody left a copy of the Fountainhead of Atlas Shrugged on my desk. So it shows him reading it. And he says, this is wonderful. I never knew life could be like this. And but then he's mistaken the heroes. He mentions the heroes as these great, the villains, I should say, as the great people. So anyway, I'm talking too much here. Gotta get some people here to anything you didn't like in these 3 chapters.
George, I was just going to comment on what you were saying there about individual achievement versus maybe some of the environmental factors. So the context of that is often businesses paying taxes, right? Rather than necessarily individuals claiming their own greatness versus acknowledging their support. One of the athletes that I've seen who made a very interesting non-individualistic claim, a guy called Conor McGregor, when he won a big mixed martial arts tournament, he had a very collective sort of view of his success. And he stated it very clearly. And it was quite interesting just to read and hear it. But it's definitely a sport where it's completely the individual. Like, it's all individual training, it's one-on-one competition, it's not a team sport, and a good podcast that I listen to has been the Freakonomics podcast, and
I listen to that occasionally. Yeah.
Right. There was an episode on something called the headwinds tailwinds fallacy, and it's the tendency of all people through their life to acknowledge headwinds, but not be as conscious of the tailwinds that are driving them forward. So I think it's nice to see when great people acknowledge the real tailwinds that they've had in their life. But I think it's disingenuous and frustrating sometimes when people think really general things for their success. Like you see actors get up and they're like, "Oh, I want to thank God," and thank all these other things. And it's like, okay, but wouldn't it make more sense to thank your teachers from the school you went to, and the people who helped you become a good actor and this sort of stuff? So I both agree with you, but then I also sometimes think you have to have some great awareness of those things that are good in society that allow you to even discover your talents, right? Because you can't even find them if you're fighting to survive.
Plus, those cultural things are available to everyone. They're common. And go ahead, Nicole.
Oh, I think I was going to say the same thing you said. If everybody has those options available to them, schooling and libraries and the computer, so why isn't everybody successful? If that's the case, why isn't a teacher who taught Michael Jackson how to play? Michael Jordan how to play basketball. Why aren't all of them become Michael Jordan? I think it's a lot more.
Well, I want to bring up something too, if I just for a second, because with Tui, for somebody who would be, preaching this sermon about collectivism, he has no regard for anyone's individual life, and he will wantonly, in order for his own power lust, I think, and he will not acknowledge. He will steal other people's ideas, not acknowledge the work of individuals. And to a certain extent, it becomes, I think, something of a mask, a screen, behind which a lot of power manipulation is going on.
That comes out clearly much later in the book, where Tui explains the real meaning of altruism. I wrote about this in one of my libertarianism.org essays, and the 6th part I did on random altruism. And he's basically, what it amounted to, in my understanding, was that altruism, it's impossible to practice it consistently. But so it's sort of a blank check. It's sort of this broad kind of feel good for the welfare of other people, but you can fill it up with virtually anything you want, as long as it's for the common good. And it becomes a very useful power tool, as you pointed out. If you want power, just you never go out and say, I want power for my own benefit. You go out and talk about how you want to help people, da 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 da.
Right.
Yeah. By the way, I was thinking of this earlier anyway, speaking of the altruism and stuff. Now, conventionally, let's go back to what we said about Peter Keating and him screwing over two of his fellow employees to climb the ladder, right? Now, most people would say that's selfish, right? They'd say the guy's so selfish, he doesn't care about other people. He's just going to do what he needs to do to get more money and more fame. He's not an altruist. He's not really trying to help anybody else. He's just trying to help himself. Objection.
I think that these type of behavioral patterns that people have, right, which is self-seeking under certain conditions and sometimes opportunistic to, to my benefit but to the detriment of someone else. People have different value systems that affect those choices. Like some might be, it's would be immoral to do that to someone with integrity and who had a high level of skill in an organization. Might be less concerned if that person was really incompetent and a fool. You might feel like, well, that person is getting their just deserves because they're not, capable of carrying out their, their role in the organization. But I think that what is certainly more admirable is when you do things that are win-win, right? Like, so it's not a win-lose, like you're winning at the cost of some other person, but you both benefit, and you want to maybe, if it's an immediate superior, you want to perhaps support them and try to funnel your efforts into something that will help the both of you to advance. But it's highly situational. Like you have someone who's going to take credit for your ideas, is not very competent, and feels like you're carrying the team. Maybe you got to kick the stool out under them, right?
But how would you reply to a critic who said the problem with Keating is not that he's an altruist or anything close, but that he's a very ruthless egoist, that he'll, for his own benefit, he'll trample over anybody by fearing their foul.
Yeah, then I think it's not moral to do that, unless there was some greater reason beyond the self, right? Like it's not, well, he's doing it for his own pure advancement, but it's not like even for the company's advancement or something like that.
Well, if you want to read it, well, I think it's a very interesting discussion of this. Ayn Rand did extensive notes for her novels, including The Fountainhead, and she has these character notes. Now, these are reprinted in a book called The Journal of Ayn Rand. And she has these character sketches. This is either before or while she's writing the novel. By far the most extensive character sketch is of Tui, which I thought was interesting. She goes into much more detail about the new art. But the upshot of that, in response to the question I raised about Keating, is these are egoists in what she called conventional sense. They were in fact pursuit of power or pursuit of whatever in Keating's case, and she said, but that really, she called it a selfless type of egoism, and it's an interesting discussion. It's a peculiar one because I've never seen anything quite like it. But she goes on to say this wasn't rational. That the characteristic of conventional egoism is its sharp contrast with the others. In other words, you either look out for yourself or you look out for others. That's the criterion between moral and immoral. If you look out for others, you're moral. If you look out only for yourself, you're immoral. And she goes in to contrast that with what she called rational egoism. I can't remember quite all the details, but it's an interesting discussion. But she does acknowledge in that discussion that Tui, at least, and I think probably Keating, are in fact egoists in the conventional view of what an egoist is. But she says the fact that Keating was concerned about his own advancement doesn't make him moral. It's a standard to use. It's very, I think, the same thing you were saying. It's the rational standards by which he judges what is and is not in his self-interest. So, but in other words, her view of egoism, this gets more into philosophy, is more kind of complicated and sophisticated than a lot of people give her credit for.
Mhm.
But I think we should be aware of that objection that even she acknowledged that someone like Keating, when he's pushing to rise in the company, I mean, normally wouldn't call that an altruistic motive. I don't think there's any inkling that he's doing it for anything other than his own interests. But
I found it interesting.
okay.
In the conversation between Rourke and Keating, when Keating brought his drawings to Rourke for help, and as Rourke was looking at the sketches, he looks at Keating and he says, "Do you even like doing this?" And it reminded me of I believe chapter 1, when Peter when Rourke was talking to the dean, and he said, "I have, let's say, 60 years to live. Most of that time will be spent working. I've chosen the work I want to do. If I find no joy in it, then I'm only condemning myself to 60 years of torture. But if I can I can find the joy only if I do the work in the best way possible to me. But the best is a matter of standards, and I set my own standards. I inherit nothing. I stand at the end of no tradition. I may, perhaps, stand at the beginning of one." I've found that to be
That's
the powerful paragraph that we've read so far in the book.
Yeah, it's a very good paragraph. Very good paragraph. You know, I think also this relates to the issue of why would Rourke consistently agree to help Keating in the first place when he brought his design to that first building that he was making for Francon. Why didn't Rourke just say, "Go away, I have no interest in helping you"? I mean, was it, quote, altruistic? Well, clearly not. I've always thought the reason he dives into those drawings of Keating's and quickly corrects them is because it's a challenge. It's like, this is such a god awful mess.
Yeah. Oh my God, I can't believe you can't see how to do this, right?
Yeah. And he enjoys the challenge. I don't think he really cares that much about it.
Yeah, I think he loves what he does.
What's that?
Yeah, he loves what he does. He loves the challenge of it. Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah.
Right, and a chance to show what he can do, which is also, again, part of the good egoist, I guess, that you're not ashamed of what you can do, and that you'll take every opportunity to demonstrate it and to do it at a high level, to function at a high level consistently, regardless of whether it bothers people or not, because we have then that whole level of envy, right? Why should we admire this person who does such good work when to do this much?
Well, to the extent that I can remember these sort of contrasting character types, it's mainly in terms of my teachers in high school and college, especially in college. I encountered professors that I thought primarily liked the power they had over students. I mean, you could tell by the things they said. Others seemed really genuinely interested in helping students, and they really wanted to do because that was their job, and they really enjoyed it. But you do see these contrasting character types, I think, in real life. So let me ask a question. This is sort of a general question. I'm asking this because I sent Marilyn earlier today a link. It was posted by the Atlas Society, a relatively late interview with Ayn Rand, and I think it was done in '73. And he asked her about, do you expect people to be like the characters that you portray? This is a big deal for friends of mine when I was in college with the Students of Objectivism Club. I mean, they'd almost look within themselves, morally condemn themselves if they did something that they didn't think that John Galt would do or that Howard Rourke would do, or even had a feeling that they don't think either of those characters would have had. And I ended up writing an essay, giving a talk, and then later publishing the result of that. It was called Objectivism as a Religion, because I thought they were treating moral rules like commandments from God, not as guidelines like Rand treated them. But that's neither here nor there. But so anyway, Rand talked about that issue. She said they weren't meant to be didactic models, like you all should walk like this and talk like this. Friends, or they almost they berate themselves because they can't live up to the standards of Rand's heroes. Well,
Everybody's tight-lipped.
but
I think there are people in real life who are similar to these characters, and I think there are some that Rand couldn't even imagine. Like, I honestly think there's, like, I work in the tech industry, and certainly some captains of industry that are, you know, pretty incredible. Like, there's Elon Musk, who's very creative, very technical, has built a number of amazing organizations to tackle some huge challenges. You know, I think she, in her vision, like, she created certain characters, but I mean, there's a person who exists and has accomplished real things that is almost beyond imagination, and it's very interesting, you know, to listen to interviews and things with him. So that's someone that I greatly look up to and just think, what a incredible person. And I like Rand's heroes for those reasons. I think they're morally and intellectually, they have integrity, and it sort of gives you the scaffolding to base some of your own thoughts and feelings on. And so, you know, I identify with a large number of the more concrete engineering-based stuff that is in her books that really resonates with me. And
yeah,
but
I still don't understand some of the architectural terms she uses. I mean, I've heard the words before, but I don't know specifically what they refer to in a building. So probably before next week's session, I'm going to actually get on the internet and look them up and find out what she's talking about. Of course, several times she refers to gargoyles on buildings, which I thought was sort of an amusing touch. Why would anybody put a gargoyle? You know, I lived in Hollywood in an apartment for like 12, 13 years. I was just across the street from Beverly Boulevard into the old Riche sort of part of that. That's where the mayor lived, the old rich people, older fortunes, I mean. And it's saw some very interesting homes. But one home quite near that area, just almost a half a block from where I lived, it kind of looked like it was meant to be the Munsters house. It has these two kind of big statues, iron castings of this sort of lion type of, I don't even know what they were exactly, but they had a kind of a gargoyle look, and the house itself kind of had those little spiral things on it, very dark, heavy gray paint. And I used to wonder who would deliberately want to live in a house like that unless they had a really good sense of humor. But they used to use it for movie. You know, like once a year, there'd be all kinds of movie trucks blocking my street, and they like to use that as a background for certain types of movies.
No, I don't think so. Although I don't live in a house that Howard Rourke would have built either.
But he wouldn't have gagged.
Another thing I was going to say about the Frank Lloyd Wright connection. Did you talk about that at all?
We talked about it all last week, yeah.
Because to my knowledge, Wright never built a skyscraper, as it were. I mean, I was wondering if they were thinking more of like Louis Sullivan. Well, I know that Sullivan moved buildings here in Chicago, and I live very near to where I lived, and his studio is here. But that is it's entirely not at all the aesthetic that Rourke, or maybe like Mies van der Rohe. Does anybody know?
No, I don't know him. Now, this office, you offered to take me there. Were they do tours of it or something? Or is that I'm thinking of Hemingway's place?
Yeah, we can take a tour of that.
But did he design his own office? Yeah,
he designed the whole house and the studio. He lived there with his family and his kids. And it's open to the public.
Oh,
and you can do it that Wright actually designed that are still here, obviously. Did you?
Rand lived in Southern California for a number of years. She had one of those modernist houses, but it wasn't designed by Wright. I forget who did design it.
Right. So I was wondering if it's Mies van der Rohe, because he was pretty famous for that kind of. He did the long flat here in the Midwest, but it does work in California. But in the Midwest, we get too much snow, and that's why we have gatehouse here in the Midwest, or those slanting roofs so the snow will fall off.
Also, if you're a fan of Frank Lloyd Wright, there's also John Lautner, who's a really great architect. He was one of his students and has a number of just beautiful residences that he worked on. And to your point,
what's his name again?
John Lautner. Lautner is Lautner.
Yeah.
And to your point about buildings with decorations and gargoyles and things on them versus more definite forms, that have less sort of decorative flourishes. In New York, there's definitely two of the buildings that you can see from pretty much anywhere in the city or surrounding boroughs. The Empire State Building is just absolutely massive, and you can see it from most places, right? Like Brooklyn, Jersey, and then the Chrysler Building, which is, they're both beautiful buildings, right? And I really like them both, and the Chrysler Building to me is probably one of the most beautiful, and it definitely has more decorative features. It's Art Deco. It has literal eagle gargoyles on it. It's not like
I see that.
Not like a church. It doesn't have all these so much that it's burdened. It really is more like a slight light touch, not a heavy touch, right?
Right.
That's interesting. Yeah. I mentioned last week, and I know somebody posted a picture of it on the book discussion group, that monstrous blue building in Hollywood. I used to drive past it all the time.
Yes.
It's on near Beverly and La Cienega. And people posted it, and then it's even got some other green and red stuff with it. And I just forgot how ugly that thing is. It just doesn't belong there. I mean, I keep expecting somebody to blow it up, but I remember, I knew it. People called it the Blue Whale. That was, I couldn't remember the derogatory nickname for it last week. But
Yeah.
Something that I'm interested just.
Huh? What'd you say, Nicole?
Oh, I said it is horrible. That's the first time I've seen it.
I think, yeah, it is bad. Yeah.
I was just going to ask the group what their opinion is on. There was a style of building. It's very modern, and then it's like you take a shape, and then it'd be deformed by some kind of external force, like maybe twisted or crumpled. And this is a really common modern style.
Really?
Yeah. I forget their specific name for it. I might try to post some examples in the group.
Is this actually a school of architecture? Does it have a name like classicism or modernism? Or
I think it's a modern or postmodern. I'll find the exact term.
okay.
But Frank Gehry has a couple of buildings nearby, like in the neighborhood near here. And I didn't know that he had designed them, and I didn't particularly like these buildings. I was kind of like, it looks like it's like trying to be too fancy, in my opinion. It's like,
You said this to him?
no. I was just saying, like, the building, just my impression as a person looking at it. It's like, okay, trying to be cool by like twisting it, but then you find out someone amazing has made it, and does that change your opinion? Because
That's a good question. Plus, I used to have these terrible arguments with Jeff Riggenbach, who is a writer and radio announcer for years and stuff, and has a very keen interest in Rand's theory of aesthetics. Thinks very highly of it, and I got into some terrible arguments online, even though we've been friends since the '70s, about some aspects of Rand's theory of aesthetics, especially your idea of a sense of life. And but I raised the issue with him once. I was sort of arguing more with the subjectivity of aesthetic judgments, and I gave an illustration. I said, anybody we started talking about movies, admitted that movies are complex because it's hard to say who the creator is. He claimed the director should get primary credit and all that. But I pointed out that I've sometimes gone to a theater and seen a movie and not liked it. Then later I'll see the same movie a year later on TV and liked it. And the only difference, it's the same movie, and if anything, the theater setting should make it more enjoyable. The only difference is the frame of mind I was in at the time I looked at it. Now, we've all had that experience, I assume. One time you watch something and you think, oh, it's awful, and then you watch it, yeah, it's pretty good. And sometimes I wonder to what extent, if I find out who the director was, if Scorsese directed it, who I think is a brilliant director, then I'm more inclined to, frankly, to give it a second look. You know what I mean? Does that make any sense to you guys? If somebody tells me, that movie didn't like was directed by an early Scorsese movie, I'm likely to say, well, then maybe there's more there than maybe I didn't give it a fair chance, and I'll go back and watch it again.
I don't know. I can see something, and then you find more information, and then it can be interesting, and it can be something to talk about, and you'll give it the benefit of the doubt. But I still know the difference in myself when I respond to something in a way that deeply moves me and that makes my brain feel like everything's exactly right, that feeling. And I know something that's just sort of edgy or, just kind of sticking a point, a stick in the rib kind of thing, annoy you, or it's trying too hard to get a response. And those are a couple of different aesthetic. And so I don't necessarily dislike the latter, but it doesn't do the same thing for me as the former would do.
Well, as I've told you before, I've always had trouble getting into novels for a number of reasons. I can never remember the characters' names. I mean, if I put down a book for 2 days, a novel, and I go, who the hell was that person? I have to go back and figure out who it was. I have a very good memory for nonfiction. I can remember, books and, history and philosophy from 40 years ago. But the other thing is, with some exceptions, and there are exceptions, but it's an interesting problem I know we're a little off topic, but the problems of novel reading, maybe you guys can help me on this, is I never can really believe that the characters I'm reading are independent characters. I always am thinking this is one writer presenting kind of God who created everything. And the way I can hook into a novel is if the writer is interesting enough. This is what I can do with Rand, because she was a brilliant, and her characters are very complex. So a lot of the times, I don't even think about whether Keating or Rourke could be real characters. I just think this is what Ayn Rand has done to develop these characters, and that's what the interest is. And you'll often hear me say, this is an interesting way Rand put it, now, I know some people, I think, Marilyn, you're like this. You can really lose yourself in a good novel, right?
Well, ideally, a novel gets you, there's that entertainment value, but also there's that imaginative element. And if it can capture my imagination, that means it's elevating me. And it's exciting. And yes, I want to be there. There's something going on there that I could imagine as being good in real life. And I think Rand was like that too, though. She even said, I try to imagine these exciting things because I want people to feel excited that life is exciting living and those challenges are out there. So, but a bad novel is a bad novel.
All right. Well,
I mean, there are a lot of them out there. So
but there are not. Go ahead.
We have to go, right?
It's 4:03. I don't know if any of you have plans to keep going, or we can continue the discussion. It's up to you.
I could stay.
Well, like I said, another 5 minutes. I have more work I have to do this evening. I have another essay I have to write, so I don't want to stay too long. But yeah, if others want to do it.
5 more minutes.
But anyway, it's because Rand has such a sort of a clear ideology, and you can see whether it's not in politics necessarily, but in terms of ideas about individualism and independence. I find that very interesting. But even the first time I read her novels, I think I mentioned this to you before, Marilyn. You know, I read her nonfiction, Virtuous Selfishness, Capitalism, all that in high school. Then I set up as students of objectivism at the University of Arizona, and still basically hadn't read her fiction. And my friend said, "Hey, you got to read Atlas Shrugged." So I got my copy. I always had a copy of Atlas Shrugged. I just hadn't read it. So I skipped, as I put it, to the good parts. The first thing I read in Atlas Shrugged was Galt's speech. Like
Oh, that's a good part.
a kid with a smutty novel. And I
You're
remember,
right at that point, yeah.
yeah, I remember I had I was reading it at the table, the students of objectivism table, and some other person in the club and said, "Wow, you've made it quite a way through the bookmark, way in that." No, I just started out reading Galt's speech first. And over, I heard people say, "Oh, I like the novel, but the Galt speech thing went on too long." The standard complaints about it. I said, "Oh, that was the best part."
Yeah, that's funny.
I'm just going to ask everyone what they think about Rand when she's interviewed. She's obviously very intense. She's powerful intellect, strongly opinionated. I think that's part of the appeal, right?
Yeah.
And we all remember people in our lives who are strongly opinionated, maybe affected our own opinions. When I was younger, so definitely early 20s, I feel like you're more intense and idealistic about things at that age, and that sometimes that doesn't go down well with others, right? And so over time, you may choose to moderate, or you may discover when other people are willing to engage with you that your idea. Anyway, my question is, do you feel like the characters she's creating are particularly around this stage deliberately? And what about later in life when you might rediscover some of your idealistic actions and return to them and kind of fill them in more detail? What do you think the characters, either in the Fountainhead or other books she's written, explore that idea? Because I feel like Chopin writes younger characters for that reason.
But I mean, I'm a little unclear here. Are you asking when Rourke gets older, will his views change at all? That sort of question?
Maybe perhaps more a question of why did she pick him younger and at that age?
Oh, I see.
I think that's typical behavior at that age, right? Certainly rejection of authority, the idea that you know more than your people teaching you.
Actually, one thing, and this is not exact speculation, but I know from reading the Barbara Brandon's book, who was with her, knew about the composition. Some of it was just that Rand felt that she could deal with people. She knew characters this age, and that she would have a grasp of them, but that she wasn't a good enough writer and didn't have enough experience necessarily to write someone older.
What commentary was that in, Marilyn?
Hmm?
Sorry, where was that commentary?
In The Passion of Ayn Rand by Barbara Brandon.
Oh, okay.
There's also.
Okay, I know that it's a controversial book, so I'm not bringing that out lightly, but she does have a lot of quotes. So because she had these lots of tapes and those.
Barbara had hours and hours of interview tapes with Rand. She's the only one that had them at the time, and she quotes extensively from Rand from those tapes.
Rand talks a lot about that process of composition and why she made certain choices. And it is very interesting.
Also, Go ahead. I want to confirm what you said, though, and it's after you're through.
So for me, there's a particular part of the John Galt speech where it talks about part of your my age at which you felt completely childish stage of life where you feel like you're this little god, that kids go through, and you feel like you can understand the world, that you can live in it, that you can affect it. And I really enjoyed that passage because it sort of spoke to something there, which is like, yeah, the world is not made up of just gray, right? Like you should develop your mind and be proud of the things that you've learned and the skills you develop. But I just find that interesting that she refers to these more idealistic phases. And I felt like, personally, over time, taking the edge off, becoming a bit less spiky was a more.
Yeah. Well, I know for me, because I was never what we used to call derogatorily a Randroid. Those people who, if you had any even hypothetical criticism of Rand, they just all over you and so the students of objectivism that I started was more like a philosophy discussion group focused on Rand, and basically anyone could say anything if you could defend your view. But the thing that Rand actually, at that age, I was pretty cocksure of myself and not afraid to say it. I was on a number of local radio programs in Tucson, and it's funny because there were call-in programs, and I was defending free markets and stuff. Very, very not offensively, but very, without doubt. And a guy calls in and says, aren't you guys a little young to be telling older people, what they should believe? And I said, if I use sarcastic, so if we came back like in 30 years and said the same thing, you'd take this more seriously. And I was so smart ass. But the funny thing is, when I got more middle aged, I was a little more cautious because I lectured at non-objectivist seminars and things, and it wasn't like Peter denying Christ. I always spoke well of Rand, and I'd have her on the recommended reading list. I'd mention essays by her. I wouldn't just mention John Locke. I said, by the way, Ayn Rand's essay, Man's Rights, is a very good summary. Actually, the guy who ran the seminars at the foundation said, well, maybe you shouldn't emphasize Rand so much. And I said, look, if you look at the application of these students and you ask them how they got interested in libertarianism, you'll find names like Milton Friedman and so forth. But the number one person, about 80% of it, was Rand. And she brought people into this movement. And for me to act like she didn't exist, because a lot of these were grad students, and it's not respectable to bring Ayn Rand up in a topical context. But the last thing I'll say about this, in this book, The Art of Fiction, and the companion volume being The Art of Nonfiction, there are informal classes she gave in New York. She discusses the very point that you raised. She's comparing an exchange between Rourke and when he meets Cameron to a similar exchange between Aerosmith in Sinclair Lewis's novel, the young medical student, when he meets this great doctor. And the way she portrays it, I haven't read Aerosmith in decades, so I don't remember. The Aerosmith character, people say, well, Lewis's portrayal is more realistic because the Aerosmith character is basically, oh, shucks, you're a great man, and I don't know why you'd want to have me for a student. Whereas Rourke is more, I'm going to work for you. Remember that scene where you first, basically, Cameron tells him to get out, and Rourke says, I'm going to work for you and all that. And she said, actually, she thought her dialogue was more realistic. And then she goes on to say that people at that age, when they believe in something, are much more passionate about it. They're much more assured of themselves. And this goes back to something very similar to what you said. But that may be I mean, she says it very well that, student of his, it's going to be more like Rourke. It's I want to work with you. I did sort of determination. So she was aware of that, certainly.
All right, y'all.
I know self-giving lectures.
I say one.
Go
I
ahead.
have to go. Okay, I can say.
Marilyn, you have.
I did not read Ayn Rand as a young person, but I've only come to her in middle age, and but I read
after me pushing her at you.
Merry Christmas. Yeah. No, but I read a lot. I have I have degrees in English and French literature and English literature. Again, I have a doctorate. So, and I've read constantly since I was a child. I loved the novel, loved fiction. So I've read a lot. So when I did read this, I never once got the sense that, oh, this is fine for a young person, but I could never imagine anything like this, or I couldn't identify with it, or I couldn't love it, because I did very much, and I found those values very much alive. So it wasn't a sense of, oh, this is just naive literature written for, for kids.
You hear that a lot, that criticism.
Yeah.
Oh, I liked it in college, but then I grew up.
I trust my own judgment because I've read a lot and I've written, and I do know that I trust my own responses to things, and I would never ever say that in a million years.
I don't necessarily mean it that way. I intended more as, why did she write young characters? Do you think it was because at that age we tend to be more idealistic? I would add that for me, I feel like I'm coming back to her writing because there's something in it that persists at the time, and I still identify with and probably always will. So wanting to...
Yes.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay, back in there.
Yeah.
I'll close this up by telling a very brief story. Back in the early 80s, after when they started, during the gaps between movies, like it ends at 8:40, another one starts at 9:20, they play these short features. They played one, and I don't remember the name of it, and one of the actors later became a pretty well-known actor, but I can't remember his name, because it must be available somewhere. It's wonderful. It's about a college. This was like, I think, made as a college movie, for students. You have to turn in like a little short production. I think this was turned in for that reason. But it had two young actors, college kids, living in the same small apartment. The woman, the girl, was a big fan of Ayn Rand's. The boyfriend didn't like her. And at one point, he faces off with her. This is sort of the climax. This is a very short piece, 15, 20 minutes. He says, I don't know how you can like that woman. She's fine. You were in high school and college, but grow up, and da-da-da. And she reads him the riot act and rips him a new one. I don't remember, but he says, you don't know what the hell you're talking about. I mean, in other words, the film is on her side, but he lectures her on that very topic that you guys raised. And it's a wonderful movie. If anyone I've never seen it broadcast one time on HBO when they were broadcasting.
Watch it.
Yeah, maybe I could track it down on the internet with descriptions of it. But anyway, okay, folks, I'm in him Facebook page. What the hell is wrong with you people? Afraid to show your face? Because
that's a pretty tough crowd here, I'll say. Okay.
Oh yeah, real tough crowd.
All right, everybody. Bye.
Bye, everybody. Say how the hell do I get out?